Welcome to the History AI podcast, where the past comes alive with facts, anecdotes, and a dash of humor. Here are your hosts, Chuck and Marco.
Welcome back to the History AI podcast. I'm Chuck.
And I'm Marco. And before we charge headfirst into medieval chaos, do the modern heroic thing. Hit subscribe.
And leave a 5-star review. Not 4. Not I'll do it later. Not I listened while folding laundry so I'm conflicted. 5.
5 stars helps the podcast grow. It tells the algorithmic dragons that we are worthy of treasure.
Also, quick reminder, every episode we do is evergreen. That means whether you're listening today, next month, or during your future career as a hermit who only consumes history podcasts and acorns.
The content still holds up, and if you want to suggest topics, you can reach out on social media. We actually read them.
We do. And yes, we have new merchandise. There's a link in the show notes. If you've ever wanted to wear something that silently communicates, I enjoy arguments about medieval logistics, we've got you. Also, stay tuned after the episode for the original song Beneath the Bruce's Banner.
All right, today's episode, the Battle of Bannockburn, 1314 Scotland versus England, Robert the Bruce versus Edward II, and a whole lot of mud, pride, and pointy sticks.
This is one of those battles where people think they know the headline, Scotland beats England. But the how is the delicious part.
And it's also one of those moments where geography looks at a big fancy army and says, "That's cute. Come stand right here."
So before we get to Bannockburn itself, we've got to talk about the mess Scotland is in leading up to 1314. Because this isn't some random bar fight between kingdoms. This is years of political chaos, bruised egos, and an entire country refusing to be treated like a provincial add-on.
Scotland at this point is basically a group project where England keeps grabbing the marker and saying, "No, no, I'll do it." And Scotland keeps slapping the marker out of their hand.
It starts with a succession crisis. Scotland's king dies without a clear adult heir, and the Scottish nobility is split over who should take the throne. And when you've got multiple claimants and no clear plan, you know what comes next.
A calm democratic process.
A calm democratic process. Exactly. Everyone sits down, they talk it out.
And then nobody gets stabbed.
Yeah. No. Instead, the Scots bring in Edward I of England, Edward Longshanks, to arbitrate. Which sounds reasonable if you don't think about it for more than 4 seconds.
Hey, can our powerful neighbor with a history of invading people help decide who gets to run our country? That's like asking a shark to judge a swim meet.
Edward I picks John Balliol as king, but he also uses the moment to push the idea that Scotland is basically his subordinate. Balliol tries to be king, but Edward treats him like a manager at one of Edward's franchise locations.
Congratulations on the crown. Now here's your uniform and a list of rules.
The Scots eventually push back. They make alliances, they rebel, and Edward I responds the way he responds to everything, with an army and the confidence of a man who thinks diplomacy is just war with extra paperwork.
And this is where most people's brains go. Ah yes, William Wallace. And then the soundtrack from Braveheart starts playing in their head.
Right. And look, we need to address the Braveheart thing. Because if your entire understanding of the Scottish Wars of Independence is Mel Gibson yelling while painted blue,
first of all, relatable.
Second, you've got the vibe, but not the homework.
Braveheart is like history adjacent. It's not a documentary. It's not even a mildly stern history teacher. It's more like your friend who tells stories that begin with, "Okay, so I might be exaggerating, but..."
Wallace is absolutely real, and he becomes a major leader in resistance. The Scots score a huge victory at Stirling Bridge in 1297, largely because they fight smart and use the terrain.
Which is a running theme, by the way. Scotland is basically like, we may not have the budget, but we have excellent map awareness.
But then England hits back hard. Wallace's forces suffer a major defeat at Falkirk in 1298, and over time Wallace is captured and executed in 1305.
Which is the part Braveheart actually nails emotionally. The war isn't a clean, heroic montage. It's painful, it's uneven, and it costs people everything.
And while Wallace is becoming the symbol, another figure is weaving through this chaos. Robert the Bruce.
Bruce is complicated. He's not the perfect shining hero who always knows the right thing. He's a noble with a claim to the throne, a politician, and at times a guy making the least bad choice available in a room full of knives.
Scotland's nobility is split. Some want independence at any cost. Some want stability, even if it means compromise with England. And plenty want whatever keeps their lands safe.
So the war so far is not just Scotland versus England. It's also Scots versus Scots, shifting loyalties, and everyone trying not to be the one who backs the losing side and ends up as a historical footnote.
In 1306, Bruce makes a decisive, violent move. He kills John Comyn, a rival claimant, in a church.
Which is the medieval version of saying, "I'm running for office," and then immediately lighting the debate stage on fire.
Exactly. It's shocking, it's politically explosive, and it forces the issue. Bruce gets crowned King of Scots, Robert Was, soon after.
And England is like, oh, okay, so we're doing this now.
Bruce's early reign is rough. He gets defeated, hunted, and pushed to the edge. There's this period where he's basically a fugitive king, moving through Scotland with a small following, surviving on strategy, endurance, and honestly, sheer stubbornness.
The man spends a while as the world's most wanted outlaw, with a crown.
But over the next several years, the war turns. Edward I dies in 1307. Big deal, because Edward I is the relentless engine behind England's campaigns.
Edward I was like a final boss who never stops respawning. And then suddenly, he's gone.
His son, Edward II, takes over, and he doesn't have the same reputation, the same military focus, or the same control over his nobles. Meanwhile, Bruce starts winning back territory piece by piece.
And Bruce does it with a kind of ruthless practicality. He doesn't just win battles, he targets castles and strongpoints. But instead of trying to hold every fortress like a collector, he often destroys them after taking them.
That's key. Because holding castles requires garrisons, supplies, money, things Scotland doesn't have in endless quantities. So Bruce's approach is, remove English footholds so England can't just roll back in and use them again.
It's like finally deleting an app instead of just closing it and pretending it won't crash your phone later.
By the early 1310s, Bruce is gaining momentum. English control is shrinking. Some Scottish nobles who were on the fence start coming around because the political weather is changing, and nobody likes being on the wrong side of history when it starts looking expensive.
So by 1314, the war's been going for years. It's been brutal. Scotland has suffered defeats and internal fractures, but Bruce has rebuilt the resistance into something disciplined.
And the biggest symbol of that momentum is Stirling Castle, still held by the English, sitting like a locked gate in the middle of the country.
Which brings us to the moment where Scotland basically sends England a calendar invite that says, "Come get this castle. We'll be outside. Bring your best army."
And Edward II, whether he wants to or not, has to answer.
Because if he doesn't, it's not just Stirling. It's England admitting, in public, that Scotland is slipping out of its grasp.
And that sets the stage for Bannockburn. So Edward II is marching north with this big, expensive, very confident English army. And Bruce is basically looking at the map like a guy setting up a chessboard.
And Edward is the guy who shows up and goes, "Cool, where do we line up so I can do the thing where I win because I brought more pieces?"
Exactly. Because if you're England, your dream scenario is open ground, space to deploy cavalry, room for archers to do their work, and enough breathing room that numbers actually matter.
Big army logic. We have more. Therefore, we should win. It's I brought a larger truck to the move, so the couch must fit through the doorway.
But Bruce isn't giving him that doorway. He positions the Scots near Bannockburn, south of Stirling, in a place where the landscape does half the fighting for him.
The terrain is uncooperative. You've got the Bannockburn itself, this stream cutting through the area, and then patches of wet, marshy ground. Not like, oops, my boots are damp, wet. Like your horse takes one wrong step and suddenly this is a bad day, wet.
And you've got wooded areas nearby too, which matters because woods are great for hiding movement, protecting flanks, and generally making cavalry feel less like the main character.
Nothing ruins a noble's day like realizing your glorious charge has been downgraded to a cautious shuffle because a tree is judging you.
Bruce is basically narrowing the battlefield. He wants the English to come in compressed, bunched up, so they can't spread out, can't flank easily, can't cycle units.
And the thing about big armies, they're powerful, but they're also clumsy. It's like trying to turn a cruise ship in a kiddie pool.
So Bruce adds more problems. The Scots prepare the ground, digging pits and placing obstacles in places where English cavalry would want to charge.
Medieval home improvement. This week on Extreme Makeover Battlefield Edition, we're installing surprise holes for your enemy's horses.
And here's where Bruce's infantry becomes the star of the show. The Scots aren't relying on having more knights or better armor or richer supply lines. They're relying on discipline.
Which sounds boring until you're facing a wall of spears that refuses to panic.
The core formation is the schiltron, tight groups of spearmen trained to hold together. Not just a bunch of guys with sticks, but an actual unit that moves and reacts as one.
It's like a moving fence made of people who woke up and chose violence in a very organized way.
The English know schiltrons can be dangerous, but they also know the usual counter. Archers. If you can shoot into a dense formation, you can disrupt it, force it to break, and then cavalry can exploit the chaos.
That's the English playbook. Softening with arrows, then the hammer blow of knights. Classic.
Bruce's answer is, you don't let them run the playbook. You make it hard to place archers effectively, and you keep the pressure on so England can't settle into a clean battle rhythm.
Which is honestly the whole vibe of Bannockburn. Bruce refuses to let Edward get comfortable.
And Edward, meanwhile, is dealing with a very real command problem, because a big army isn't automatically a well-coordinated army.
Right? You can have all the ingredients for a cake, but if your chef is stressed, your oven is cramped, and half your nobles are arguing over who gets the biggest slice, you're not getting a cake.
And that's the English situation. They've got powerful nobles, different factions, and a king who's not exactly inspiring confidence as a battlefield organizer.
You know when someone says, "I've got this," but the tone suggests they do not, in fact, have this?
So the English approach, and they start trying to force a way through. And the Scots are waiting, calm, positioned, ready.
Which leads us into the first real clash, and one of the most famous moments of the whole battle.
Yeah, because before the main fighting really even fully detonates, someone decides to try their luck against Robert the Bruce personally.
And that's when history gives us the medieval equivalent of, "You really want to do this right now?"
So the English are closing in, the lines are forming, and there's that tense pre-battle energy where everyone's waiting for the first big move.
That silence before the chaos. The "this is fine" moment right before it absolutely is not fine.
And Robert the Bruce is out in front, close enough to be seen, riding on a smaller horse, not wrapped up like a walking tank the way a knight would be.
Which, from the English side, looks like the world's biggest invitation. Like, oh, the king is right there and he's reachable?
Exactly. An English knight, Sir Henry de Bohun, spots him and decides this is his shot at becoming a legend.
This is the main character syndrome moment. He's thinking, if I take out the king, the whole Scottish cause collapses and everyone will write songs about me.
So he lowers his lance and charges straight at Bruce.
And here's the thing. In your head, you picture Bruce doing the sensible move, right? Like, back up, get behind your men. Do not risk the entire war effort in a one-on-one.
But Bruce doesn't back up.
Of course he doesn't. Because history loves drama.
He waits, and I mean waits, until the last possible second, then shifts his horse aside and brings down an axe on de Bohun as the knight flies past.
And just like that, de Bohun goes from future ballad hero to historical cautionary tale.
It's one of those moments that immediately becomes bigger than itself. Because whether you're a Scottish soldier watching it, or an English soldier hearing about it, it hits you right in the gut.
On the Scottish side, it's like our king just personally deleted a charging knight. That's morale you can't buy.
And on the English side, it's like, wait, he did what?
Because now you're not thinking of Bruce as a rebel, you can intimidate. You're thinking, oh, he's that kind of leader. He's not leaving.
Bruce rides back, and the story goes that some of his men are horrified, not because he won, but because he took the risk.
They're like, "Sire, that was reckless." And he's like, "Yes, but did you see the form? Also, I broke my axe."
Whether that exact line happened or not, it captures the vibe. Calm confidence, almost casual about the danger, which is exactly what you want your troops to feel.
It's also a reminder that Bannockburn isn't just tactics and terrain. It's psychology. It's momentum. It's the story people tell themselves in the moment. about whether they can win.
And that duel, right there, tells the Scots we can. It tells the English this isn't going to be easy.
And now, the real fighting starts. Because once the blood is spilled and the challenge is answered, nobody's going back to polite negotiation.
Day 1 becomes a series of clashes as the English try to push through the tight approaches and the Scots try to hold their chosen ground.
And here's the problem for Edward. You can't just decide to have the battle you want. Not when the ground and Bruce are both saying no.
Which takes us straight into the first day of the battle, where England tries to force the issue and starts discovering that more soldiers doesn't automatically mean more control. So after that duel, you can almost feel the tempo change. No more posturing. The English have come to relieve Stirling, and now they need to break through. Fast.
Because the longer this drags on, the more it favors the Scots. Bruce wants a fight that's tight, ugly, and controlled. Edward wants a fight that's open, sweeping, and, most importantly, English.
Day 1 is basically England testing the door, realizing it's locked, and then trying to shoulder check it anyway.
Over and over, with increasingly expensive shoulders.
The English advance in parts, probing the Scottish positions, trying to push routes through the narrow ground. And the Scots respond the way disciplined infantry responds. They hold formation.
Which is incredibly frustrating if you're cavalry. Cavalry wants movement, angles, clean lines. Instead, they're seeing this bristling wall that doesn't flinch.
And that's the thing. When cavalry charges work, they work because the enemy breaks. If the enemy doesn't break, now you've just launched your horse into a problem.
And your horse is like, I did not agree to this.
The English try to make headway, but the terrain keeps compressing them. Units bump into each other, momentum gets disrupted, and the Scots are positioned where they can absorb pressure without giving up the key spaces.
It's like watching someone try to fight in a hallway, while the other guy is calmly blocking the doorway with a fridge.
Meanwhile, Stirling Castle is right there as the prize, so psychologically, the English feel like they have to push.
That's the trap. You can't just decide to step back and reset, because the whole reason you marched north was to prove you could handle this. You're performing kingship in real time.
And on day 1, the performance is not smooth.
Not smooth is generous. It's more like big army energy, small battlefield reality.
The fighting goes back and forth, but the Scots maintain cohesion. Bruce keeps his army together, doesn't get lured into some sprawling mess, and doesn't let the English find the open space they need.
And you can imagine English commanders feeling the clock ticking, because now you're spending daylight and lives, and you still haven't cracked the position.
As evening approaches, Edward's army has a big problem. Where do you put all these men?
Right, camping, which sounds like a boring detail until you realize it's everything.
The English are forced into a cramped overnight position. They're packed in close, with bad ground around them, limited room to reorganize, and not the kind of space that makes a large medieval army feel confident.
It's like being stuck in a crowded parking lot. And you know that tomorrow you'll need to do a clean 3-point turn with a whole fleet of trucks.
And the Scots can see it. They can feel it. The English aren't set up for a clean, decisive day 2.
And here's the difference in mindset going into the night. The English are thinking, we didn't win today. The Scots are thinking, they didn't beat us today.
That's huge. Because for the Scots, survival is progress. Every hour they hold, every English charge that fails, every moment England can't get comfortable, it all adds up.
And for England, every failed push is a little crack in morale. Doubt starts creeping in. People start looking at the ground and realizing it's not their friend.
Bruce, on the other hand, has something priceless going into day 2. Momentum, confidence, and a plan that doesn't require miracles, just discipline.
And now comes the part where Bruce does something that really changes the battle.
Because on day 2, the Scots don't just sit there and absorb attacks.
They move.
And when those schiltrons start advancing, that's when Bannockburn stops being a struggle and starts becoming a collapse.
All right, day 2. This is where it gets legendary.
Morning of day 2, and you've got this weird contrast. England has the bigger army, the heavier cavalry, the reputation, but they wake up boxed in.
You know that feeling when you sleep wrong and your neck is stiff? England wakes up and the entire army is stiff. Like, great, love camping. love being unable to deploy.
Meanwhile, the Scots are rested in comparison, and more importantly, they're ready. Bruce knows if he waits for England to solve the puzzle, eventually they might. So he doesn't wait.
This is the "we're not letting you reboot your router" strategy.
The schiltrons form up, and instead of just planting themselves and bracing, they start advancing.
Which is terrifying. Because if you're an English knight, you want to think of spearmen as stationary. You want them pinned, nervous, easy to disrupt. You do not want them coming at you like a spiky tide.
And it's not a sprint. That's what makes it so unnerving. It's this steady forward push, tight ranks, spear points out, men shoulder to shoulder.
Like the world's angriest hedgehog rolling toward you in slow motion.
The English try to respond, but the space is against them. They can't spread out cleanly. Their own numbers start working like a disadvantage because everyone is jammed together.
This is where more turns into in the way. You've got cavalry trying to find lanes, infantry trying to hold positions, commands getting shouted and swallowed by noise. And the Scots just keep closing.
Now, the English do have a tool that could be decisive: archers. If you can get archers firing into dense formations, you can punch holes in that discipline.
You don't need to wipe out the whole schiltron, you just need to make it wobble. Once it wobbles, cavalry does what cavalry does.
But Bannockburn is not giving England clean angles, and Bruce isn't giving them time.
It's like trying to set up a camera shot while someone is steadily pushing you backward down a hallway.
The Scots' pressure keeps rising. The English lines compress further. Horses rear and balk. Knights can't get the glorious charge they imagined. They're stuck in starts and stops, bumping into their own men.
And once a medieval army starts to feel trapped, the fear spreads faster than any messenger.
Exactly. The moment a rumor starts, we're surrounded, we can't move, they're breaking through. It becomes a physical force. People shift, units bend, order begins to fray.
And then there's this sudden nasty truth about battles. Once you're packed in tight, you can't retreat gracefully. You can only retreat like a crowd leaving a stadium through one door.
The Scots keep advancing, and now the English aren't thinking about winning. They're thinking about not getting crushed.
Which is the mental flip you never recover from.
And right around here, you get one of the most infamous psychological gut punches of the battle. Movement behind the Scottish line. Camp followers, support people, the non-combatants, spilling forward, visible in the distance.
From far away, to a stressed-out English soldier who already feels boxed in, it looks like fresh reinforcements. Like, oh good, there's more of them.
Whether they truly looked like a new army or just added to the chaos, the effect is the same. Panic spikes.
Because the English have already had a day of, this isn't going to plan. And now day 2 feels like the plan is actively being chased down and beaten in the street.
The line breaks, and when it breaks hard.
This is the route. The moment a battle stops being a contest and becomes a flood.
English soldiers start trying to escape the press, toward the burn, toward open ground, anywhere. But the terrain that helped Bruce earlier now punishes the retreat.
Mud, water, narrow spaces. Suddenly every step is a negotiation with physics, and physics is not on England's side.
Edward II realizes the day is lost. He's pushed away from the center of the fighting, and eventually he's forced to flee.
Which is one of those moments that seals the story. When the king goes, everyone understands what that means. There will be no rally, no last stand with a heroic speech. This is survival now.
Stirling isn't relieved. The English withdrawal becomes chaotic and costly, and the Scots have done the impossible. They've taken a larger army and made it fight inside a box.
And then they shook the box until everything fell apart.
And when the dust settles, Bannockburn isn't just a Scottish victory. It's a statement.
Which takes us to the aftermath, what it meant immediately, and why this battle echoes way beyond 2 days in June.
Because the real power of Bannockburn isn't only the bodies on the field.
It's what happens to politics, legitimacy, and momentum after the king runs for his life.
So once Edward II is gone and the English army is in full retreat, the field doesn't just feel like a victory. It feels like a door swinging open.
And not a gentle door. Like a door kicked off its hinges with a boot that says Robert the Bruce on the side.
Stirling Castle, which was the whole reason Edward marched north in the first place, is now basically doomed. The relief effort failed, And that deadline agreement means the English garrison has to face the reality. Nobody's coming.
Imagine looking out from the walls like, any minute now, any minute. And then all you see is dust, chaos, and the general vibe of, we messed up.
And that's the immediate, tangible result. Scotland's strategic map shifts. But the bigger result is psychological. Bannockburn tells everyone in Britain, nobles, towns, allies, enemies, one thing: Bruce is not a temporary problem.
He's not a speed bump. He's not a rebellion you can manage with a big enough army and a stern enough
He's
letter.
a king who can win. And in medieval politics, can win is real.
Legitimacy is not just bloodlines, it's momentum. It's who people believe will still be standing next year.
Exactly. The Scottish nobles who were hesitant, the ones who kept one foot in each camp because they liked living, Bannockburn makes that fence a lot more uncomfortable to sit on.
Because suddenly, neutrality looks like a great way to get on the wrong side of the guy who just broke England in a mud
And
puddle.
England's side of the ledger gets uglier. Edward II doesn't just lose soldiers, he loses authority, a king who rides north with a massive army and comes back chased. Politically, that's gasoline on a fire.
Your nobles already don't trust you? Great news. Now they have a fresh, very public reason not to.
And while Bannockburn doesn't instantly end the war, because wars are stubborn that way, it changes the direction of it. Bruce isn't just defending anymore. He's got room to expand the pressure.
This is where Scotland can start playing offence in a way that actually matters. Raids into northern England become more frequent. English border regions feel the war in their daily lives.
And that does something important. It brings leverage. Because a war isn't only won on the battlefield, it's also won when the other side gets tired of paying for it.
Medieval warfare is expensive, and losing a battle like Bannockburn is like taking a hammer to the budget and the reputation at the same time.
Plus, there's the international angle. Other powers, especially France, are always watching England. If England looks weaker, alliances shift, opportunities appear.
Nothing makes a rival smile like seeing the invincible neighbour stumble.
For Scotland, Bannockburn becomes the centerpiece of a story. We can resist, we can win, we can be independent. It becomes bigger than Bruce. It becomes identity.
And that's why people keep talking about it centuries later. Because it's not just a tactical victory, it's a narrative victory.
Bruce will spend the years after Bannockburn consolidating power, pushing England, and trying to translate battlefield success into lasting recognition.
Which is the hardest part. Winning a battle is one thing. Winning the paperwork of history is another.
But Bannockburn makes that paperwork possible. Without it, Bruce is a rebel king fighting uphill. With it, he's a proven ruler with a state behind him.
And Edward II. He's the king who had every advantage and still got outplayed by geography and discipline.
And that lesson, about terrain, about leadership, about refusing the enemy's preferred fight, becomes part of military memory, not just Scottish memory.
Bannockburn is basically a warning label for any army that thinks size alone equals victory.
And with that, we're at the point where the dust has settled. But the ripple effects are just getting started.
Which means it's time to zoom out. What Bannockburn becomes in myth, memory, and why it still gets invoked whenever people talk about Scotland, independence, and national pride.
Because once a battle turns into a symbol,
it never really
so
ends.
here's where Bannockburn stops being only a battlefield and starts being a mirror. Because once the fighting's over, people don't just count the dead and go home. They tell stories.
And the stories harden. They become the version you teach your kids, the version you sing, the version you reach for when you're trying to explain who you are.
And Bannockburn is one of those events that gets bigger every time it's remembered. Robert the Bruce becomes more than a king. He becomes a symbol of grit, of defiance, of refusing to be absorbed by a stronger neighbor.
It becomes proof, not just that Scotland fought, but that Scotland could win. And that's powerful. That's the kind of thing that survives centuries.
And on the English side, Bannockburn becomes a lesson, sometimes quietly, sometimes painfully, about leadership, planning, and what happens when you assume the world is going to cooperate with your advantage.
It's also, frankly, a reminder that real people were there. English soldiers who thought they were doing their duty, Scottish soldiers who thought they were fighting for their homes, a king who had to run, another king who had to gamble everything.
And this is where I get a little, reflective.
Chuck's about to stare into the middle distance.
Just for a second, because when you read about Bannockburn, or any big historic moment, it's easy to pick a side and treat it like a sports rivalry across time.
My medieval team is better than your medieval team.
Exactly. And sure, the emotional pull is part of why history sticks. But what I really think matters is keeping the history alive in a way that doesn't flatten it into a poster.
Right? Because if we only keep the heroic version, we lose the human version. And the human version is where the lessons actually live.
Bannockburn matters whether you're Scottish, English, neither, both, or just someone who likes the idea that clever planning can beat raw power. It matters because it shows how decisions pile up, political decisions, tactical decisions, leadership decisions, and then one day they collide.
And it matters because memory is fragile. If you don't keep telling the story, somebody else tells it for you. And they might tell it wrong, or tell it in a way that's only useful for their argument today.
That's the thing. History isn't just what happened, it's what we choose to remember and how we choose to remember it.
And no matter what side you're on, you can respect the people who lived through it without turning it into a cartoon. You can acknowledge bravery without pretending the war was clean. You can honor identity without treating the other side like faceless villains.
Exactly. Because the truth is, for most of the people there, this wasn't legend. It was fear, exhaustion, adrenaline, and mud in places mud should never be.
Bannockburn is famous because it's dramatic, but it's important because it's real. It shaped lives, borders, politics, and identity, and it echoes because we keep echoing it.
And I think that's why we do this show. Not to pick winners, but to keep the past from becoming a vague blur, to keep the names, the choices, and the consequences in the light.
Plus, it's kind of comforting in a weird way, like people have always been people. Ambition, fear, pride, loyalty, bad decisions, good decisions. The setting changes, but the core doesn't.
Bannockburn reminds us that history isn't inevitable. It's built, and it can turn on planning, on terrain, on leadership, on one army being forced into the wrong place at the wrong time.
Or on one guy looking at a charging knight and going, "Not today."
And whether you feel a pull towards Scotland's fight for independence, or you feel for the English soldiers caught in a disaster of leadership and terrain, or you're just fascinated by how the whole thing unfolded.
Keeping the story alive is the point. Because when we stop remembering, we stop understanding. And when we stop understanding, we start repeating mistakes with different costumes.
Which brings us to the end of the journey, where we wrap up, say thanks, and remind you how you can help keep this little corner of history alive too.
Because unlike Edward II, we are not going to pretend we can do this without reinforcements.
Exactly. And that brings us to the end of today's episode on the Battle of Bannockburn.
2 days in June, one muddy stretch of ground, and a moment that turns into a legend that people still argue about, celebrate, and wrestle with centuries later.
Thanks for spending your time with us. Seriously, whether you're listening on a commute, doing chores, or staring dramatically out a window like you're about to ride into battle,
we appreciate you. You're the reason this show exists.
And if you enjoyed this episode, please do the 3 big things. Rate the podcast, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review.
5 stars helps the podcast grow. It's the simplest way to tell the platforms, hey, more of this. And it helps new listeners find us.
It really does. And if you know someone who'd like this, someone who loves history, strategy, national myths, or just enjoys hearing 2 guys talk about medieval chaos,
share the show with them. Text it, post it, carrier pigeon it. We're not picky.
Reminder, all of our episodes are evergreen. If you're new here, jump into the back catalog whenever you want. These stories don't expire.
And if you've got a topic you want us to cover next, hit us up on social media. Suggestion messages are genuinely welcome.
One more thing. We've got new merchandise. Link in the show notes. If you want to support the show and look good doing it, check it out.
Nothing says I have excellent taste like repping a history podcast while everyone else is wearing shirts with random brand names.
From me, Chuck.
And me, Marco.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for keeping history alive with us.
And if someone invites you to fight on their chosen ground,
maybe read the terrain first.
Or at least ask where the marsh is.
last breath in lungs and splintered bone. If history remembers one thing true, it's what a people will do when push clear through. Hold the line at Bannockburn. Let the songs be sung, let the pages burn. From father to son, let the story sound. How freedom stood on Scottish ground. We stand or fall, but we won't kneel down. Forever crowned by Bannockburn. So raise a cup to the ones who stood with blistered hands and courage crude. Not for glory, not for gold, but the right to call their future their